Hi everyone, and welcome to the next of our community group Bible studies, where we're looking this term at how we can grow in our outreach and evangelism. And today we're looking at a parable where Jesus commands us to love our neighbour. So if you've got a Bible there, if you want to turn to Luke chapter 10, Luke chapter 10, and we're going to pick it up in verse 25. Luke chapter 10 and verse 25. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" And he answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself." "You've answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, "Well, who is my neighbour?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he travelled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I'll reimburse you for any extra expense you may have had.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" And the expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." I guess most of us, if not all of us, would agree that friendships are important. It's not good for people to be alone. It's sad when people are lonely. We all need community. We all need friendships. And friendships in the church are particularly important and often very special. We don't have and we don't want a formal kind of church where people come and they go, but they don't really know one another. I love having friends within the church. In all the churches I've been involved in, I've had some amazing friendships that have lasted years and years. And we want those kind of friendships in the church, friendships that are meaningful and deep. Jesus said this in John 13:34, "As I have loved you, you are to love one another." And so we're to make friends with one another, particularly within the church. But then Jesus also says, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." And so the quality of our relationships within the church is also a model and an example to those outside the church. But as Jesus models to his disciples, we're also to be friends with those outside the church. It's great to have friends inside the church, but we're to make friends intentionally outside the church, in our workplaces, in our schools and colleges, in our neighbourhoods, in the clubs and groups that we belong to. And if we're going to be able to win people for Jesus, then actually we must first love them and befriend them. Now, in fact, surveys show that most people come to faith. They come firstly to church often, but most people come to church and they come to faith because of a friend or relative. Now, obviously, some people come because of an event. Some people come because of an encounter with God, some experience of God. But for 80% of Christians, the main influence in them coming to church or coming to faith in Jesus was a Christian friend or a family member. Before events, before Alpha, before any other experience, conferences or anything like that. But the main thing is people have Christian friends. Somebody befriended them. Somebody shared their faith with them. And if we as a church want to see people saved and added, which we do, then the main way that that is going to happen is through us. Events can help, Alpha can help, but the main way that people will come to church is because they're invited by a friend. The main way people will come on Alpha is because they're invited by a friend. Ultimately, people will come to know Jesus because someone says to them, come, I've met Jesus. Why don't you come and meet Jesus? And if we as a church want to grow, which we do, then most of that growth will come through you and me making friends with others. And being a friend is more than just having acquaintances. I find I meet a lot of people walking our dogs, and dog walkers can be quite friendly, but actually they don't often say very much. So it's very easy to say hello and what's the name of your dog. But people aren't often interested in you as a person. Now, often friendships start with the small things. They start with hello and good morning and what's the name of your dog. I understand that, but if it's going to be a friendship, if we're going to say we truly love our neighbour, then in time we want to be able to go beyond small talk and get to know people. You see, being a friend means you care about them, you love them. You recognise this is a person with hopes and fears, with dreams and with worries and concerns. They're not simply objects to be gathered in, but as people to be befriended and loved and cared for. That's genuine friendship. And that is what Jesus calls each one of us to love our neighbours. You go and do this too, Jesus says. You see, Christianity demands that we are sociable, that we learn how to relate to other people for the sake of the gospel. Now you might think, oh, well, I'm not really like that. I like my own company and I don't really do hospitality. I don't really do sociable. And I would just say, well, you need to change then. Because actually, we want to become more like Jesus and follow his example. And he was sociable. In the gospel, he is called the friend of sinners. People said, look at him. He's a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And this is the one we're following. One who befriended people actively, even as God befriended us. We're to befriend others, getting alongside people rather than viewing them as evangelistic targets no, we make friends with people. And firstly, that's much easier than trying to somehow persuade them with our cleverness, or it's easy to make friends with people if we really make the effort. And secondly, it's much more enjoyable because there's a lot of lovely people out there who we want to win to Christ. So what can we learn from this parable then about loving our neighbour? Well, the first thing is friendship involves risk. Firstly, friendship involves risk. So notice the first two characters in the parable, a priest and then a Levite. They were both religious people. Now, surely they know that God expects them to care for others. Surely they know that. But no, they walk by on the other side, probably because the man is, it says, half dead. And they don't want to take the risk of being made ceremonially unclean. Better not take the risk. How might it affect me? What's the impact on me going to be? I won't get involved. What if I get drawn in? What if this person becomes a burden to me? What if they take advantage of me? What if they reject me? And friendship involves taking a risk. And if we're going to make friends with people, there is risk involved. You might be misunderstood. People might actually take advantage. That might happen. Doesn't happen very often, but it might. There is a risk involved. But actually, we're called to make friends with people. And who knows, you might make friends with them, and in time they become a great friend, and you may even lead them to Christ. So friendship firstly involves risk. The priest and the Levite, they were not going to take any risks. How sad. How disobedient, actually. Friendship involves risk. That's the first thing. Next then, friendship involves crossing boundaries. You see, Jesus' hearers would have expected a dig against the religious leaders. But you think, so they'll probably be thinking, oh, yeah, have a dig at the leaders, that's true. But they're probably expecting Jesus to then come up with an ordinary Jew. Of course, the ordinary man, he's kind, he'll help, he's generous. And so perhaps that's what they're expecting next. But Jesus gives it a twist, because there was a traditional bitterness between Jews and Samaritans. And so Jesus twists it, and it's a foreigner who helps this man. It's a foreigner who crosses the road and stops and helps. Why would he help a Jew? It's just so unlikely. And Jesus is making a statement that actually we need to cross boundaries to love people and befriend people. Oh, but they're so different from me. Maybe, but obedience to God means that sometimes we need to cross boundaries in order to make friends with people. Perhaps even the boundary of your own road. You need to cross the road to make friends. Boundaries of geography, boundaries of age, a stage of life, the kind of person they are, sexuality, their religion. But we need to cross these boundaries in order to befriend people. Yeah, certainly befriend people who are like you. That's a great thing to do. But let's also befriend those who are different from us. Maybe actually we'll find that people aren't so different. And so secondly, friendship involves crossing boundaries. Thirdly, friendship involves compassion. Notice in one of the verses it said he took pity on him. He had compassion. And we should befriend people because we care about them. Not because we've been told to, not simply because of obedience, although obedience is part of it, but actually we should care about people because we've got compassion for them. We've got compassion for the people of Honiton and East Devon. Did the priest and the Levite, did they not care about the man? Well, I guess they didn't care enough to do anything. And it's easy for us to say that we care for other people, but do our lives show that? See, we develop friendships with people because we care about them. We care about their worries and their concerns and their health. And ultimately, of course, we care about their ultimate destiny. We're not content with just saying, well, I know I'm saved, I'm okay. No, actually, we care about others. We love others enough to share the gospel with them. And friendship involves compassion. Fourthly, friendship involves a cost. So the Samaritan, he was diverted from his journey. He had to give bandages, he had to give oil and wine and some money, and he had to give his time. This act of kindness, this act of friendship was costly to the Samaritan, and friendship costs you something. Now, hopefully, we won't begrudge that cost. It's not a cost and not a burden to care for our friends, but in a way, it can be costly to make friends. Hospitality can be costly, cost money and time. But if we're to reach other people for Jesus, then we'll need to give time to it. It won't just happen accidentally. And we need to be prepared to bear the cost. Perhaps it means you can't just do what you want to do every evening of the week, or perhaps you can't watch as much TV, or perhaps your hobbies, you can't do all the hobbies you want to do. But friendship involves cost. We want to be determined to, I'm going to love my neighbours. Oh, there's cost. Yeah, there is, yeah. But I'm going to love my neighbours. Friendship involves a cost. And finally, friendship is an end in itself. Friendship is an end in itself. You see, Jesus is simply teaching love your neighbour. And there's no other agenda given, actually, for the friendship. We can think sometimes our friendships are just to see people saved. Caring for others is just to see people saved and join the church. And of course we want that for people. We want people to come to know Jesus. We want people to be saved on the final day. We want people to become Christians. And we want that. We want them to have a relationship with God. We do. But we mustn't see our friendship simply as a means to an end, as if our friendship was wasted if people aren't saved. I mean, did everyone Jesus spent time with become his disciple? Well, no, it doesn't seem that they did. Some did, obviously, but I'm sure many didn't. And yet Jesus was just friendly, giving himself to others. and helping people, befriending people, loving them. We do it because it's good to do that. And yes, it does give gospel opportunity, and that's important, but it'd be right to do those things even without the gospel opportunity, as a demonstration of love and grace. Although, of course, part of loving people and being gracious to them is telling them about God and salvation. And so we want to make friends with people because we love them, because God's loved us and we want to show his love to others. And so we're called to befriend people, to love our neighbours. I wonder, do you have friends outside the church? Not just the people you work with, although of course they can be our friends, but what about your neighbours? Do you know your neighbours? Do you talk to them? Do you ever speak to them about anything more than, hi, how are you? How's the weather? Let's be those who develop friendships intentionally with people. The danger is we can become so busy, and thrown into that is church life, that actually we have little time for friendship outside the church. And that's not a good thing. Now, of course, we have friends in the church. That's wonderful. But God is calling us to love our neighbours and reach out to those around us with the gospel. Let's be intentional about it. Let's love others the way God has loved us. That Jesus left his place in glory to come to earth to save us. Let's be those who don't think, oh, it's costly. No. I'm going to pay the price to win people to Jesus by loving them and befriending them.